Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk. I know it's late in the day, and apologies for the little bit of difficulties when we started. Real quick show of hands. How many of y'all thought of the Chingy song Holiday Inn when you figured out that this was going to be at the Holiday Inn? Me too, totally. Cool, I just wanted to know. That joint is hot. I hope they played it at the after party. My name is Ibrahim Madha, or Ibrahim Madha as it's listed. Everyone calls me Ibu, so please feel free to call me that. I work at Slack as a front-end engineer on the infrastructure team. If you're not familiar with Slack, we build enterprise messaging software. You can follow me on Twitter at OMGIbu, but I'm warning you, it's mostly nonsense, but so is all of Twitter, so. So we don't have a lot of time. We have like 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to squeeze in a lot. Here's what I hope we can learn. We can learn about composition as a pattern. We can share some tactics for building reusable components. And we can practice reducing complex requirements into objects with rules. And just to note, this talk is mostly centered around writing components in React. But you can apply this to any UI framework of your choice. You can even use some of these methods and use them in non-UI code. So before we go any further, another show of hands, how many of you know what composition means? Okay, cool. So this is how I would define it. Composition, it's an object-oriented pattern in which larger general objects are composed with smaller specific objects. It's often contrasted with inheritance. So how many of you know what inheritance means? So it's not super important for this talk, but we'll just go over the differences real quick. They're both basically ways to share codes, patterns, functionality, and any abstractions for reusable parts in software. You probably are already using a combination of these patterns already, especially if you're using React. I find that most people naturally use the principles of composition in programming. The human mind is really already very good at segmenting things and breaking things down into components and compartments. And sometimes it's really necessary to understand the moving parts in order to get the big picture. Composition is generally preferred for React components, and you can look at the React docs for more information. There's a great article about composition versus inheritance. And I pulled a quote for the next slide that I thought to be generally true. And I'll just read it. Props in composition give you all the flexibility you need to customize a component's look and behavior in an explicit and safe way. Wow, such wisdom. All right, so now that we have an idea what the heck composition means, let's talk about a process for building reusable UI components. So this is a condensed version of steps that I like to take or questions I might ask to determine how to actually build a thing. So first, we're going to collect all requirements and assumptions. So this is pretty basic and true of all projects. If you're a software engineer, you've had to do this before. You really need to understand the breadth of what your component should do before you set out to build it. And also writing down a list of rules and assumptions can be helpful to communicate with the team and group like things together. Then we're going to sketch out a few examples with an ideal API. So this is a really important step to me because you're designing something to be reused or used by others. The API is the interface you really want to make shine. It seems like working backwards from a finished product, but I find it to be a great way to go. Just like when you use mocks from designers before you start building your UI, the same kind of thing. You build an API first, and then you can sort of figure out how to get there. And then finally, we're going to consider implementation details ahead of time. So we're never going to actually get to coding in these steps, but we're going to try to imagine in our mind's eye what it might look like. So like what kind of trade-offs might you make? How long will it take? Who or what are the expected consumers of the component, etc. And I've also outlined like 6 general categories for considering your design a success, and we'll use these to gut check our ideas. And here they are. They're readability, so what does the code look like? Would it repeat itself? Maintainability, would the code be easy to understand? Does our pattern prevent bugs? Flexibility, does our solution serve all of the different permutations? Extendability, can we add features easily? Testability, which is so underrated. Test your code, y'all. Can we easily test all the pieces? And correctness. Correctness is like how correct is the abstraction? Does the metaphor make sense? Can we easily understand and communicate it? So I put correctness in a gray box, which is a little hard to see on the screen because of the contrast. But the reason why I did that, it's kind of the loosey-gooseyest, touchy-feely one, and it is definitely more subjective. There can be a lot of opinion when determining correctness, so use it sparingly. All right, let's get it. We're going to do an example. We're going to try our process, and we're going to try to build a reusable component. We're going to go into our component kitchens and cook up one of my favorite things, burgers. And to make it fun and interesting, we're going to do veggie burgers, turkey burgers, and chicken sandwiches too. Chicken sandwiches are kind of a burger, right? Same thing. So let's think about burgers for a few moments, as we approach dinner. Let's think about burgers and all their variations. Let's consider how the toppings can be different. There can be different buns, patties, cheese, and again, a chicken sandwich is kind of a burger anyways. So we want to be able to cover all of these cases with our component. Let's also imagine that we live in some kind of a future where React is not rendering to the DOM, but maybe it's rendering to like actual food or something. So it's a great future, also a terrible future. Let's start by building a burger component. So we're going to compose our burger component with props. Again, props are like the most common way to compose UI in React. So let's try the process. We're going to collect our requirements. So let's make some assumptions about burgers. For the purpose of this exercise, let's say we agreed upon these rules with our stakeholders. Steak, get it? Burgers, stakeholder. So we're going to have many types of buns. We're going to have sesame, brioche, and gluten-free. And sometimes, for the carbless people, we'll do no buns and use a lettuce wrap. We can have mustard, ketchup, or mayonnaise, and they can be aioli or vegan. And we're going to have an option for how much sauce we want, like light sauce, less sauce. We're going to have lettuce, tomatoes, onions, which can be grilled or plain, avocado, and bacon. We can have cheese, and there's different kinds of cheeses. We got 3 different kinds of patties, beef, veggie, and turkey. And we'll get there. Only beef patties can be cooked at different levels, right? Because turkey has to be well done, and veggie patties are kind of one come all. And then we'll also have a chicken fillet, and that can be grilled or breaded. And finally, we can have multiples of cheese or patties, so you can do stuff like double cheeseburgers. Okay, so let's take those ideas and let's sketch out an API. So here is an example of what a burger component might look like. So this is simple, like standard McDonald's fare, right? It's a burger with ketchup, mustard, and pickles. You can look at the component and you can see what it has in it. Not bad. This is a more complicated deluxe double cheeseburger. This is something that I might order if I was really hungry. You can see it gets a little bit longer, but it's still kind of, you can tell what's going on. Here's a veggie burger. We're supporting the veggie burger case. And then finally, this is a lettuce wrap burger, which has grilled chicken instead of a thing. So this one is interesting because it doesn't really feel like a burger, even though it has the same pieces. It's not really the same thing, but it works. So we move on. So let's consider these implementation details. Our API doesn't seem bad, right? It's really easy to look at the code and understand what you're getting. But however, we might be locked into a specific structure of the burger, but that doesn't seem like the worst thing because we're kind of happy with that. You can see that we had a lot of different options. There's lots of props, and so I thought about how might the prop types look for this. So you can see that's a lot of props, and there's a lot of repetition. So I'm curious, how many of you have built or maintained or even used a component or even a function with lots of parameters? So it can be kind of a nightmare. There's so many moving parts to a monolithic container that's hard to keep in your head, and it's especially difficult when you're coordinating with others. So let's take a step back. Let's evaluate our solution with our steps. So readability. So the code is going to have lots of options and conditionals, and it could be pretty repetitive, but the API looks good. Maintainability. So we have lots of special rules around which props are coupled together, like doneness for beef patties and the amount of sauce for a sauce. It'll get really confusing fast. For flexibility, it's pretty rigid and only as good as the options and presets we've defined. Extendability isn't too bad. You can just add a prop and make sure your render code matches and it's all good. But again, it'll increase the complexity of this single burger component. Testability, it's such a monolith that integration testing is kind of the only way to go. It's going to be hard to break it down into little pieces. And as far as correctness, to me, the abstraction seems off. Chicken sandwiches, much less chicken lettuce wraps, aren't really burgers, even though I just said they kind of are. That being said, it's pretty easy to understand, and we can just pass around these burger objects all day. But can we really just look at a picture of all the different kinds of burgers and know how to build it without peeking at our options? I'm not so sure. So let's think about it a little more. What if we broke the burger down into its pieces? We broke the recipe down into ingredients, and instead of shipping a packaged burger, we ship the kit to build a burger. So this is our next approach. We're going to compose a burger with smaller components. So React components can totally render more React components. So we can use components as props or pass components into the main part of the component. So let's build the smallest pieces of a burger and establish a pattern. So let's try our steps again. We're going to collect requirements now. So we did a great job of listing all those requirements a few slides ago. And if we were going to look at that again, we can sort of kind of see natural pattern and grouping. So using that, let's figure out some new rules. So buns are the container for burgers, right? And the different types of buns are alike enough. Lettuce wraps, however, are pretty different, but they still contain the burger. They still contain the topping. Mustard, ketchup, and the two different kinds of mayonnaise are really just sauces with different amount properties. And all the rest of the toppings don't really have anything to do with another. They're sort of individual pieces. Onions are special, though, because they have that grilled property. And patties should probably all be their own thing, since beef has a doneness property, and then the other two patties are pretty different from that. And then the chicken fillets are also different enough, and we know that they come in two types. All right, so now let's use that and kind of sketch out an API as all the little pieces as components. So here you can kind of see that the bun is a container, and we're putting all of our little components in there. We can really arrange them any way we want, and it's still a burger. Our complex double cheeseburger has gotten a lot easier to read and a lot less long because some of the options that were specific to the parts of the burger are now contained within the options themselves. Our veggie burger still looks good if you're, into that. And our lettuce wrap now looks like a lettuce wrap and not like a burger. It's still composed of the same pieces, but it doesn't claim that it's a burger. So let's consider these implementation details. So what do y'all think? Does this feel a little bit better? To me, it feels like we're freeing up the possibilities a little more. And although we don't have that nice packaged burger component, we can easily go through many more configurations of it. So let's go through our criteria. Readability. So each component lives by itself, and so we're having these more distinct abstractions. We might have to jump around files a bit, but there's no 1,000-line render functions here. Maintainability, because things are separate, we won't accidentally crisscross them when maintaining. So for instance, in the last implementation, if we had a bug with our veggie burger, we would have a bug with our meat burgers. So here, because they're a little separate, the part that makes them a veggie burger or a meat burger, then we're not going to overlap there. As far as flexibility, it's way more flexible. Can you imagine building a triple stack burger with this system, or even a BLT on a bun? It'd be easy. We have the parts. Extendability, same kind of thing here. It's just as easy as adding new components, since they all sort of live by themselves. We could do sliced bread and deli meat, and we could make cold cut sandwiches. Or we could use one piece of bread and do an open face thing, put some avocado toast on it. Millennial heaven. And as far as testability, it's great for unit testing. Each component can be rendered shallowly, and you can test it individually, and you can still do integration testings because you can just compose the packages you want. And as far as correctness, it feels better to me. It's easy to communicate and understand the pieces because they relate directly to the metaphor, to the thing that they're representing. It opens us to make things that aren't even burgers with a similar pattern. So we lose that nice single package, but I think it's a worthy trade-off. This is an artist's depiction of me eating dinner. All right, so some takeaways. These are some quick lessons to go. Get it? Because we're talking about burgers. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so specificity is inevitable, but we're going to try to make it as small and distinct as possible. So for many components, that first approach is just fine, but that's not going to work for everything. And you'll always have one-trick ponies and singletons, but we just want to limit them to their most atomic pieces possible. Instead of building the spaceship, let's build the Legos we need to build the spaceship, or rather, let's build the ingredients rather than just the meal. Design a solution with the end goal in mind. Working backwards from an ideal API helps. Again, I think this is really helpful for any sort of code you want to share inside of a system with other developers, because your API is your interface. Interfaces make the world go round, and thinking interface first will make this much more smooth for you. Things break and requirements change. Make sure your code stays flexible. So there are no perfect abstractions, right? Everything has its downsides, so we have to learn to roll with the punches. You're going to acknowledge that product requirements and user needs change, and the things that we build won't be sticking around for long. Future-proof your designs, and your future self will thank you, if you had a time machine. So these are practical patterns, and here's where I think they make the most sense. So large teams with shared maintenance, again, because you're breaking things down, you can sort of parallelize development. You can't really do that with one big monolithic component. Imagine running into those conflicts when trying to merge over each other. It's ideal for complex products like Slack with repeating objects that we configure and reconfigure infinitely. And yeah, we totally use this pattern at Slack. Some examples are messages. So we show messages in different parts of the UI. Like their main message pane, you have them in your search, and sometimes in pins and stuff like that. But they're all slightly different. They use some of the same pieces of messages, but they don't look the same. Same with message attachments, which we let external developers use through our platform. They can have text, images, videos, buttons, and they compose them in JSON, but we convert them to React components on our side. Menus are also similar because they don't really fit into templates. They can have different headers, submenus, et cetera, and any combination of those. So we build the tiny pieces instead of forcing people to use templates. And speaking of Slack, we're hiring. My team, front-end infra, has been looking for a candidate for a while. And if you're not into that kind of thing, there's plenty of open roles. It's a very diverse and thoughtful workplace, and I think everyone could fit in. You can check out our jobs page for more information, or you can just come find me after this and we'll talk. There's also Tomi and Duretti, who are both Slack employees that will be around. Yeah, definitely. And since you haven't seen enough burger gifs, here's Dracula eating a burger. Thanks, y'all.